So this webinar, thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to tune into this. I honestly I hope that people find it helpful. We're going to talk about some of the main options for musicians and crew coming to the US. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, this is just a disclaimer that this information is not specific legal advice. It's more just general information for people, just generally speaking about options for musicians and crew. Okay, a little bit about myself. My name is Ray McEntee. I am a partner here at the McEntee Law Group. We're based in Chicago, Illinois. I'm originally from Dublin, Ireland. I'm a licensed US attorney. I'm also a qualified solicitor, which is the equivalent of an attorney in Ireland, England, and Wales. I have been in the US and working with the McEntee Law Group since late 2014. We're a full service immigration firm, and I head up the sports and entertainment department at McEntee Law Group. So in that capacity, we work with various major leagues here in the US, and I work with various different teams, sports teams in different sports, with some clubs, players, coaches, other supporting staff on advising and help prepare and filing visas and green cards. And then again, I work in the music and entertainment sphere as well, advising clients on visas and green cards. So with bands, solo artists, with crew, producers, executives, and so forth. And then we also advise and work with individuals in the motion picture and television industry too. Okay, so an overview of this webinar. We're going to talk about, I'm going to kind of go through the main options that we see for musicians and crew. I'll talk about, kind of what those visas are and what they entail. We'll talk about the application process, how you go about filing, what's required, and the timeline. Talk about some key considerations. I'll talk about some challenges and common issues that we see when we are working with clients and preparing these cases. And then at the very end, if people have any questions or comments, they can kind of pose them, and hopefully we'll have time to answer that. I said that the webinar will probably be about 30 minutes or so, as I know everybody is busy, so I'll try to keep it brief and informative. Okay, so the main options, that are available for individuals in the music industry are the P1 visa, which is for internationally recognized musicians or members of a musical group. P3 visa, which is for culturally unique performers. The O1 visa is for extraordinary ability individuals in the arts, in this case, as it relates to music industry. And then we also have the essential support visas that, in the P1 and P3 context, that's a P1S and a P3S. So that would be essential support personnel to that primary P1S. So if it's in relation to a P1, if you're doing a P1 for a band, it would be any sort of crew that are coming. For the P3 culturally unique performer, it would be any essential support personnel coming to support them. And then in the O1 context, you have a primary O1 beneficiary, and then everybody else would be O2. So that could be other band members, it could be supporting musicians, and then crew. So tour managers, engineers, sound engineers, lighting engineers, guitar technicians, merch managers, and so forth. So these are essential support personnel. That are an integral part of the performance of the primary beneficiary, and their services cannot be readily performed by a US worker. Okay, so the first option, we'll talk about the P1B, internationally recognized musicians or members of a musical group. Okay, so who should be looking to apply for a P1B? If you're coming to the US temporarily to perform as a member of an entertainment group that has been established for a minimum of 1 year and recognized internationally as outstanding in discipline for a sustained and substantial period of time. Okay, so what does that mean? Essentially, you need to have at least 75% of the group must have been a part of that group for at least 1 year. Internationally recognized, what does that mean? So that's defined as a high level of achievement in the field, evidenced by a degree of skill and recognition substantially above that ordinarily encountered, to the extent that such achievement is renowned, leading, or well known in more than one country. Okay. So how do you show, like, if you're a band, how are you going to show that you are internationally recognized? How do you show that you meet the international recognition requirement? Okay, so how you can do this is you can show, if you provide evidence of your group's receipt of or nomination for significant international awards or prizes for its outstanding achievements in the field. So if you can show that you have received or been nominated for a significant international award or prize in your field, in the music field, then by that should show that you're internationally recognized. So examples, maybe you a Grammy or a Brit Award or some other award in the field of music, then that may make you eligible, show that you're internationally recognized. If not, if you don't have that award or nomination, there's alternate criteria that you need to satisfy. And there's 6, and you need to satisfy at least 3 of these criteria. First one is evidence that your group has performed and will perform as a starring or leading entertainment group in productions or events which have a distinguished reputation. So basically what you would do is, in the music context, what you would do with this is we typically show for bands, we would show evidence of them performing at festivals around, it doesn't have to be if you've previously had Ps, you could provide evidence of performances in the US at music festivals and then also around the world. You'd provide evidence of lineups to show your past performance that you have performed. So if there's printouts from websites showing lineups for festivals, evidence of that could show how you would perform there. And then future performances, you need to show that you have performed. You also need to show that you will perform again in the future. So if you have any work lined up, if you have any festivals booked for the summer, or upcoming, you would provide evidence of that as well. Also, as part of your itinerary, we'll talk about later, that can kind of show where you're going to be performing. So that first criteria, it's past and future. So you need to show you have performed and you will perform. Starring or leading role for productions or events that have distinguished reputation. So typically what we do is evidence of you performing at festivals or big events. Okay, so that's the first one. Second criteria is your group has achieved international recognition and acclaim for outstanding achievement in the field, as evidenced by review in major newspapers, trade journals, magazine, or other published material. Press. What we do for this is we provide press about you and your band. The bigger, the better. If it's a national publication, fantastic. Individuals, say if you're in like Billboard, Hot Press, or Billboard, Rolling Stone, that's like, they're huge. You're featured or not, that's fantastic. If you're not, it's not the end of the world. If you've got national publications, so say if you're in Ireland, if you're in the Irish Times or the Independent, if you're in Hot Press, that's great. If you're in other countries, similar, if you have national press, fantastic. Also, if you're on prominent websites that get a lot of viewership, that's fantastic as well. We use a lot of online publications. If you're in music journals, music magazines, prestigious online music websites, we can include them as well. So that's, ideally it's going to talk about your band. It's going to talk about you. It's going to talk about kind of, maybe sometimes it's interviews. It'll talk about performances coming up. So that's kind of how you satisfy that second criteria. It's press. The third one, it's similar enough to the first criteria, just a little bit different. So evidence that your group has performed and will perform services as leading or starring group for organizations and establishments that have distinguished reputation. So, this is, again, it's past and future. So you need to show you have performed and you will perform. So instead of like productions and events, it's organizations and establishments. So typically how we would use this in a music context is you would talk about, if you played at prestigious music venues, you kind of list them. We talk about them. We talk about, we provide evidence on these venues and include that. And same thing again, you need to provide something showing that you're going to provide and you're going to perform there in the future. So you would talk, if you've shows lined up at prestigious venues, you would include evidence of this, talk about it. You provide your itinerary for upcoming events to talk about that. The next one is evidence that your group has a record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. So, how we show this is, more often we talk about online streaming numbers. So we would look at bands streaming numbers on Spotify, on YouTube, Apple Music, the various different online music platforms. We talk about that. If your numbers are high, that's great. You would include them for particular songs, for monthly listeners. Talk about that. Otherwise, if you've won any awards, if you've have platinum sales, if you've received, if you've charted, if your songs have charted, we would talk about that as well. If you have, if your album singles have charted, we talk about that. If you've gotten on to really prestigious Spotify playlists as well, we would talk about that as well. We'd include evidence of that. So that's kind of how that's how you satisfy that, showing commercial and critically acclaimed successes. Any awards that you've won, we would put that in that section too. Okay, the next one, your group has received significant recognitions for achievements from critics, organizations, government agencies, or other recognized experts in the field. This is a really, really good criteria. Everybody should be using this. What we include here, typically what we do here is we get expert letters. You get 5 or 6 experts in the music industry to provide letters about you. This is great because it's a standalone criteria. It satisfies one criteria, one of the 3 that you need to, and then you can also use those letters. They can say, hey, this band are they're internationally recognized. They played at these fantastic music venues, and they've also played at these big festivals. These are some of the biggest festivals in Europe, for example. And also their Spotify numbers are fantastic. They've got 100,000 monthly listeners. Their top song has got 10 million streams. This is really incredible. Streaming is, it's becoming more and more a part of the music industry. Having these numbers is fantastic. So that those expert letters, they're their own criteria, but that you can also use them to prop up your other criteria. So they're really, really good. And I would recommend, if you're looking at a P petition, you get expert letters. Final one. This is one we don't really use as much. Sometimes we do, but it's not as used as much as the first 5. This is evidence that you have commanded or will command a high salary or other substantial remuneration for services compared to others similarly situated in the field. Like anything, like any industry, it's just salaries are all over the place. If you have, received or will receive a high salary compared to others similarly situated, then you absolutely can use this. You would provide evidence of contracts. If there's a deal you've got and it has figures on it that you want to share, you include that. If you're receiving royalties or anything like that and they're really high, you can include that in. But that's not one of the criteria we use that often. But if it works for you, then use it. So that's the 6 criteria for the P1B. You need to satisfy at least 3 of them. Okay, so the next thing I guess is important is, how long is a P1 valid for? So basically, a P1 is valid for the time needed to complete event, competition, or performance, but not to exceed 1 year. So up to a year you can get with a P1B. You can extend your P1B in increments of up to 1 year to continue or complete the event or performance. You can also, that's if you're in the US, you can extend your P1B for up to a year. Then if you just come in and you get a P1B, you go home, you can then, you can apply again for another a new P1B for up to 1 year. It doesn't have to be a year, but it's the maximum you can get is a year with P1B. Okay, P3 visa. This is for culturally unique performers. So this will apply to you if you're coming temporarily to perform, teach, or coach as artists or entertainers, individually or as part of a group under a program that is culturally unique. Some examples of culturally unique performers would be Irish dancers, traditional Irish musicians, flamenco, tango dancers, salsa dancers, and so forth. So if you can show that your art form is culturally unique, you could potentially apply for a P3. So you must be, in order to apply for this, you must be coming to the US either individually or as a part of a group with the purpose of developing, interpreting, representing, coaching, or teaching a unique or traditional ethnic, folk, cultural, musical, theatrical, or artistic performance or presentation. So you must be, and you also must be coming to participate in the cultural events, which will further the understanding. So you coming here to participate in these events must be for the purpose that will further the understanding or development of your art forms. And these programs that you're participating in can be of a commercial or a non-commercial nature. So with P3s, so how long is a P3 valid for? So it's similar to the P1. It's for the time needed to complete the event, competition, or performance, not up to 1 year. Again, with the P3, you can extend your P3. P3, you can extend your P3 for up to a year. And then the same again, if you leave, that's if you're in the US and you need to extend it, or you can leave the US and then you can apply again for another P3, for a new P3 for up to a year. P3, can you sell? I just got a question here. P3, can you sell tickets? If you have a P3 visa, yeah, it can be a commercial performance. You can be coming to participate in commercial performances that would, involve selling tickets. So if those performances, yeah, they can be, yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump now ahead to the O1 visa. So the O1 visa is extraordinary ability individuals in the arts, and in this case, music. Sorry, I'm getting some more questions. I'll look through the chat and I'll answer questions at the very end if that's okay. I just want to make sure I get through everything. So I'll answer all questions at the end. Okay. So the O1B, in order to qualify for the O1B, you need to show that you're extraordinary in your field. In this particular context is in music, and that you're coming temporarily to the United States to continue work in your area of extraordinary ability. Okay. So what's extraordinary ability? What's that mean? So O1B, O1B is extraordinary ability in the arts, and that's defined as distinction, which is a high level achievement, a degree of skill and recognition substantially above that ordinarily encountered, so that the person is renowned, leading, or well known in their field. Okay. O1B. So the O1B and the P1B, the criteria are very similar, very, very similar. It's just a level of scrutiny. With the P1B, you need to show that you're internationally recognized. With the O1B, you need to show that you have extraordinary ability. So the level of scrutiny is higher for the O1B. Okay, so again, the criteria for the O1B, they're very similar to the P1B that I just discussed in detail there. So I'm going to kind of quickly run through them again. So, if you show that you've been nominated for or received a major award in the field, that in itself will show that you're O1B eligible. So if you've won a Grammy or like an Oscar or a Tony or, major awards in music, by winning that or being nominated for that, that should show you're O1. If not, which a lot of our clients haven't, there's the alternate criteria again. 6 of them, you need to satisfy at least 3 of them. Same thing, lead, starring, or critical role for distinguished organizations or establishments. This is, you're going to kind of look at your music venues, or if you've featured on like major television networks in your country, talk about that. Establishments, if you've been playing at prestigious music venues in different countries around the world, we'll talk about all of that again. Second criteria, again, distinguished leader, starring role, distinguished productions or events. If you've been on distinguished productions like really established TV shows, we would talk about that. Festivals as well, and it's past and future again, the same as the first one here. So music festivals, we would talk about evidence of you performing at music festivals, past and future ones lined up. Third criteria, press. You want to include press about you as a musician. The bigger the better. Again, the best type of press you're going to get is like Rolling Stone, Billboard, and so forth. National publications, really distinguished music websites that maybe are publishing blogs, that type of thing. That's criteria 3. 4, expert recognition. Again, that's where you're going to get those expert letters. You're going to get 5 or 6 experts talk about you, talk about how they're who they are, what their kind of background is, and how they're considered an expert in the music industry. Then they're going to talk about you, how they know you, and then they're going to talk about how you're extraordinary. They need to be specific. They're going to provide some examples. And they have 1 million online. They have 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify, and they featured in on one of Spotify's really, really successful playlists. Also, they were number 1. Their album was number 1 in their home country charts. Also, they have performed at these major festivals. They were at Glastonbury or they were at Electric Picnic. And and so forth. Get those expert letters to touch on other criteria to support them. Then that's 4. 5 is a record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. You're going to talk about your streaming numbers. If they're good, you're going to talk about them. You're going to talk about Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, other streaming platforms. Maybe it's Tidal, so forth. If you've had success in the charts, you're going to talk about that as well. If you've won any awards, you're going to talk about that as well. That's going to go into the major commercial or critically acclaimed success. Final one again, high salary or remuneration. If this works for you and you are with that, then great, use that one. If not, don't worry. You only need to get 3 of those 6 criteria. So that's the criteria for the O1B. So typically how we would see an O1B set up really is, it generally works better for like solo artists, where that solo artist would be the O1B. And then, their essential support will all come in on O2 if that's other backing musicians, or crew as well, like that. Sometimes you have bands where you can do an O1B, and typically is that because you want to get, it's more established bands that want to get a longer visa validity dates. So, you would maybe have pick one person to be the primary O1B, and then you would have all the rest of the band and the crew would come in as an O2. So that's kind of what you would look at in the O1B context. Just bear in mind, P1B versus O1B. You can essentially get a bit longer for the O1B. The level of scrutiny is higher. It's extraordinary ability versus international recognition. Okay. How long is the O1B valid for? Again, I'd mentioned that. You can get it for up to 3 years. And then, same again, you can request an extension if you're in the US you can request an extension of up to 1 year or to accomplish the event. Also then, you can get an O1, you can leave the US and you can apply for a new O1 for up to 3 years again, and you can keep doing that. So O1B, you can get it up to 3 years. If you want to then file an extension, it's up to 1 year for an O1 extension, and then you can file new O1s for up to 3 years as well. Okay. I'm going to group all of the essential support kind of visas together. So that's P1. So P1S is just for P1B. P3S is for a P3 artist, and then O2 are essential support personnel for O1s. So P essential support, it's individuals who are integral part of the performance of a P entertainer and who perform support services which cannot be readily performed by a US worker. Examples of essential support: P1S essential support: guitar technicians, lighting technicians, sound engineers, tour managers, choreographers, merchandise managers, and so forth. They're just some examples. It's not limited to that, but they're just some examples. Okay, what are the limitations of an essential support visa? The main limitation of getting a P1S is that your P1S visa is linked to the primary P. You are only able to come over and provide essential services to that primary P1B, to that band. Essentially what that means is you can't work independent. You can't get a P1S and then, work for other bands or other individuals. Your visa is linked to the primary P1B, and you can't work independent of them. That's a major limitation. How long is an essential support visa valid for? Typically, you're going to get the P1Ss. They'll be issued for the same duration as the P1B. They're never going to go beyond that because they're linked to the P. You can't have a P1S without a P1B. So they're linked to that P1B visa. So they will only ever really be for the duration of the P1B, possibly shorter. Okay. O2 essential support. Again, it's pretty similar to the P essential support. So in order to qualify for an O2 visa, you need to show that you're an integral part of the O1A visa. So it should say O1B visa holder's performance, and you must have critical skills and experience with that O1 visa holder that are not of a general nature and cannot be readily performed by a US worker. Again, examples similar to the P. You could have, support musicians. You can, if you do it in a band context, you could have other band members, guitar techs, lighting techs, sound engineers, tour managers, again, choreographers, merchandise managers, so forth, photographers, etc., etc. Again, limitations for the O2, it's linked to the O1. You can't work independent of that O1. You can only go in and provide essential support to that O1. How long are the O2 valid for? Typically, again, they're going to only be valid for, the same duration as the primary O1, possibly shorter, but you're not going to get it any longer. Okay. So, and then just another quick thing in relation to essential support, how you show that you're critical. Typically what you do, you're going to provide evidence of your working relationship with primary beneficiary. You're going to say when you started with them, what your role is, your job description, and you're going to kind of show that, you have such a experience of working with them, like this intimate experience, that you absolutely are integral to the performance, and that another person can't just come in and pick it up. So that's kind of how you show that. Okay. So that's kind of the main options we talked about. Next, we're going to talk about what's involved in preparing, being able to file these cases. First thing, most important thing, you need to have a U.S. petitioner. U.S. petitioner is an individual or an entity here in the U.S. that agrees to file the case on your behalf. They're the ones that are signing off on the forms and actually filing a case with the U.S. government. If you don't have a U.S. petitioner, you can't file your case. Example, in the music industry, who can act as petitioner? If you have an agency that's representing you, you can do that. If you have a record label, the label can act as your petitioner. If you have a promoter here, maybe they'll act as it. If you have a manager here, maybe they'll act as the petitioner. Booking agents, maybe they can act it as well. It's not just one person. There's multiple people who can act as it. But generally, it's like labels, booking agent, tour manager. If you have a manager here in the States, or they're typically who will act as petitioners. Okay. In the music context, we typically see an agency petitioner setup. Basically, an agent petitioner it allows you to have a little bit more flexible in relation to employment, who you can work for and what you can do. It's nice because with other employment visas, the petitioner is the person who files the case and they're your employer, and you can only work for that person. In the music industry, as P's and O's, as they kind of incorporate a wide range of industries, some where people are more, typically wouldn't have that employer-employee relationship, it allows for this petitioner setup. I'll go through some of the common ones that you see in the music context. An agent petitioner performing the function of employer. So this is, you have an agent who's agreeing to file your case. Maybe it's your booking agent here in the States, and they agree to act as the agent petitioner. They're also kind of doing a lot. They're like, working on stuff. They're helping negotiate contracts. Maybe they're booking events for you, helping set up itineraries and stuff like that. If there's, they're kind of there's a level of control there in what your US activities have been, and they're more than just filing the case, then maybe you would set it up as an agent petitioner performing the function of employer. It would really depend on your circumstances, but that's one we use. The next one would be agent petitioner for multiple employers. We see this sometimes as well. Where there's multiple employers, you have multiple employers here in the US, and all those multiple employers there's one agent petitioner who says, hey, I'm going to agree to file this O1 petition on behalf of all of these employers. Restraints with that is every employer listed in the petition, they need to give authorization. So you need to get them to sign like a authorization for the petitioner to act on their behalf. So sometimes it can be difficult to do that. But, sometimes it works. Maybe you have a record deal and you have like a sponsor here in the US, and, you've got a couple of different, maybe you have your own company set up here. That's another employer for you. So that can potentially work as well. So an agent petitioner for multiple employers. One thing to note about that is any employer listed there, they need to provide authorization. That will cause issues if you don't. The government are going to come back and ask for that. Another one, which we kind of use a lot, actually, which works very well in the music context, is agent petitioner for a foreign employer. So this is a solo artist or a band. If you have a company set up outside the US, wherever you are, and that company provides your services, then, that company can reach out to a US agent and say, hey, will you agree to file this case on behalf of our company for these beneficiaries? That can work really well, where, the agent says, okay, I'm just filing this case on behalf of the companies. That can work really nice as well. So if you do have your own company set up outside the US that kind of provides your services, furnishes your services, then that's a good option. And as I said, this agent petitioner setup, if it's done right, it should provide more work flexibility as opposed to your traditional employer petitioner setup, which basically only allows you to work for the employer. Okay. Another thing, when you're preparing these petitions, this is kind of more so in relation to the O&B context. If you're looking for a 3-year, you need to avoid what's known as speculative employment. This is something we've seen recent trends with USCIS. That's the government agency that adjudicates petitions. where they have been taking it upon themselves to shorten validity dates for O1Bs to kind of match up with the itinerary and contracts that have been submitted with the case. So how do you avoid USCIS coming back and saying, we think this is speculative employment? That will trigger like a request for evidence, and as I said, it could potentially cause a reduction in the validity dates for your visa. So how do you avoid the perception of speculative employment? You need to provide as much evidence as possible of what you're going to be doing in the US during your requested period. So what does that mean? Projected itinerary. You're going to have a projected itinerary for your entire period that you're looking for. I know that this for a P1B where you can get a year, or P3 for a year, maybe that's okay. You can do up an itinerary for a year. When you're looking for an O1 for 3 years, that's where you're kind of coming into problems. Like, I know that it's not common in the industry at all to have a 3-year itinerary. Probably nobody has one. So that's where it can be an issue if you're looking to get the 3 years. If you don't provide a 3-year itinerary, there is a good chance you're going to get a request for evidence that USCIS are going to come back and say, you've asked for 3 years. We've only got an itinerary for 1 year. What are you going to be doing for the other 2 years? So my advice is you provide a projected itinerary as detailed as you can for that 3-year period. If it's an O1 for a 3-year period, if it's for the P1 for a year, this is list out projected performances. This is subject to change. Itineraries are subject to change, and you clearly state that, and you're allowed to add similar events to your itinerary without actually having to amend it. So, it doesn't have to just be performances. You can have promotion, you can have time for doing promo, doing promo work. You can have rehearsal time, recording. You can have, it doesn't have to be just performances. You can put other stuff in there. Word of the wise is we have seen sometimes if you list recording and rehearsal time, that they may come back and say, show us dates and locations and evidence of where you're going to be recording new music. Do you have like a lease with the studio and so forth? So that's just something to keep in mind. So a projected itinerary for the entire period. Confirm contracts of anything that's confirmed, any performances that are confirmed, absolutely include those contracts with the case. Sample contracts. So we find that if we include sample contracts that aren't signed, that aren't confirmed, or just draft contracts that correspond with your projected itinerary, sometimes that'll help, to have them in. Record deals. If you have a record deal and that covers, US activities, recording music in the US, fantastic, include that. As I said, evidence of promotional activities, sponsorship deals. If you have any US-based sponsors, include that in that deal. If you set up your case if it's set up as an agent petitioner for a foreign employer, get an employee will include employment agreements with your foreign employer for that 3-year period, as well as the projected itinerary, your confirmed contracts, your sample contracts. You want to include as much as possible to try and avoid speculative employment. Okay. The next thing, what else is involved? What else do you need for your application? Consultation letter. Music, you need consultation letters. So musicians, you have to request a consultation letter from the American Federation of Musicians. You basically just submit an application to them, and they provide this letter that says they have no objection to you filing you meet the P1 or the O1 criteria, and that they've no objection to you filing this petition. Crew, they need to file. You need to get the same thing. You need to get a consultation letter from IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees. Both of these consultation letters, you need to include these letters with your case with USCIS when you file your case. So you need to make these requests to the unions beforehand and, include them with your cases. You have to have a consultation letter for music. Okay. So supporting evidence for O1B, for the O1 and B and the P1B. Typically, what are you going to be including? As I kind of alluded to earlier, evidence of performances at music festivals. Evidence of your performance at prestigious music venues, press. If you have press about you, interviews about you, just articles talking about some of your performances, reviews, fantastic. The bigger, the better, with press. You can also include smaller regional ones, but, it's better. The bigger it is, the better. Also, word to the wise, make sure whoever's doing your case reads the article. Make sure there's nothing crazy in that article. Make sure that it's reviewed, but with press, it's press about you. The bigger the better is what you're looking for. Evidence of your commercial and critical success, streaming numbers, if it's on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, so forth. Evidence of chart success, if you have it. Evidence of awards, evidence of record sales. If anything's gone gold or platinum status, include that. Fantastic. Recognition from experts. Letters from music experts discussing how you meet the criteria and providing specific examples. Get those letters to touch on the other criteria as well to support them. And then again, salary. If you have evidence that you've gotten a high salary or are going to get a high salary compared to others in the field, include that as well. With the O1B, with the P1B, if you haven't got that major nomination or award, 3 criteria, you need to satisfy 3 of them. My advice, if you have 3 really good criteria and 1, not great one, I would probably just go with the 3 really good ones. Put your best foot forward. You need to satisfy 3. 3 of them should get you across the threshold of showing internationally recognized or extraordinary ability. Okay. Supporting evidence for essential. Okay, for the P3 as well. So what evidence do you need for the P3? So typically what we do, you want to show you're going to talk about what you're doing, how it's culturally unique. You'll talk about your art form. You'll describe it and say that it's, it's absolutely a culturally unique art form. And typically how we do that as well. And then we'll provide evidence of what you're doing in the US and how that is culturally unique. And then we get support letters and affidavits. So recognize experts who can talk about your art form and say, this is absolutely, culturally unique. If it's Irish dancing, for example, they'll talk about it. Yeah, it's culturally unique, Irish dancing to Ireland, and they'll talk about it. And, they'll provide evidence and talk about you, affidavits. If it's, tango dancing, you'll have tango experts talking about how that is culturally unique. So that's kind of the P3. Supporting evidence for essential support personnel. This is, job description. Job description is what you're doing with what support are you providing? A detailed job description. When did you start working with them? What's your start date? And you want to talk about, you have this intimate understanding and experience working with this primary beneficiary, that, nobody else would have this just straight away. It's learned over your time with them. And that's how you're integral to their performance. Okay. What is the timeline for the process? Okay, I'm going to break this up into 2 quickly. For attorneys to prepare the case and then the adjudication process. So for attorneys to prepare the case, every attorney is different. Our firm, assuming we have everything we need, all the information, the required documents, the signed forms, the agreements, petitioner and everything, all of that done. It'll take us about, 3 to 4 weeks to prepare a case. That includes filing with the unions and then getting your case filed with USCIS. We can expedite. If you need to be here sooner, much sooner, we can expedite this process, but we have to charge an expedite fee. And depending on how soon you need to be, this can be a lot more expensive. It's much more expensive. So give yourself time. But typically it's about 3 to 4 weeks once we have everything. So that means not from when we start the case, from when we get all of the evidence we need. You're looking at a 3 to 4 week process. Adjudicating, how long does that take? It varies. You have the option of filing with premium process and you just expediting your case, which is much quicker, or you can go regular. So premium, it's a much quicker service. It's more expensive. You have to pay an additional $2,500 filing fee. That's just an extra filing fee you need to pay to get the expedited service. How that works is within 15 calendar days of the government getting your case, receiving it, they'll take an action, either a decision, they'll approve it, or a request for evidence. If they issue a request for evidence, that's where they say, hey, we need more information before we can make a decision. If that happens, the clock stops until you submit the response, then the 15-day clock starts again from 0. If you don't file premium, you file it regular, it's cheaper. You don't have to pay that $2,500 filing fee, but there's so much more uncertainty. You don't have any control over how long it gets adjudicated. It takes as long as it takes. And, it's processing times, they vary. They're subject to changes based off the current processing times. Example, P1s last month, they were listed at 2 weeks in California Service Center. It's now 2.5 months. And, you don't really get much notice of that. It is what it is, and you have no control. So if generally in the music context, time is of the essence. So, probably premium is where you want to go, but it would obviously just depend on finances and so forth. But just bear in mind that regular processing, you have very little control over things. Okay. So that's your case. Once your case has been approved then, so say your case gets approved, you move on to consular processing. So this is basically your case being approved. Now you need to kind of take steps to actually get a visa stamp in your passport. Unless you're Canadian, you don't need a visa stamp in most regards. Everybody else needs a visa stamp. So once your case is approved, you then need to fill out an online form, pay the visa fee, and then try and schedule an appointment with the embassy in your home country or third party country to get your visa stamp. You know, depending on your circumstances, you may be able to send your application in by mail, or you have to get an interview. If you need to get an interview, it just depends on what their availability is like at the embassy. If you apply by mail, it varies. Could be 3 weeks, could be 4 weeks, could be 2 weeks. It depends on the consular post. Consular processing. Make sure you factor this in when you're looking at timelines for being in the US. Give yourself enough time and then some for consular processing. You know, if you also give yourself plenty of timing to, you know, maybe you can avoid premium, that you'll save $2,500. If you're filing for, you know, essential support, that's a separate case, separate fees, separate filing fees. So, you know, if you give yourself enough time, you'll save $5,000 just in filing fees alone. So give yourself more time. You know, just take into account that you may get a request for evidence and this can delay the processing of your case. Take into account delays at the consular stage. You know, maybe it's you can't get in for an expedited appointment, or you have to apply by mail and it could be 3 or 4 weeks. You know, sometimes people go into administrative processing where, you know, you go in for your visa and then background checks cause a delay and you get your visa issued. That can take several weeks. It can take months. Just give yourself as much time as possible. You know, a minimum of 6 months before you need to be in the US, you should be starting minimum of 6 months. And that's if you're filing with premium, I would say. Anything less than that, it can be done shorter. But when you're less than 3, if you're like 3 months or less, you're leaving a lot up to chance. Even if you're filing with premium, you may not get the visa in time. There could be, you know, if there's a request for evidence, if there's delayed consular stage, you know, you may have to reschedule shows. And that's just, the more time, the better. Give yourself as much time. I would say if you're looking at regular, even a year before start the process, it can take you time to find a petitioner. So I would, you know, just give yourself as much time as possible. For that. Okay, common challenges. What do we see when we're working with music clients? Finding US petitioner. For musicians who have been over here before and have gone through this process, not so much a problem. They have relationships in place. They have, you know, they have a tour manager here. Maybe they have a deal here with a record label, or, you know, they've had promoters here. They have these established relationships. So, you know, they can kind of probably go back to them and they'll probably be happy enough to work with them. If you haven't, if you've never been in the US and you've no representation here, it can be hard to find a petitioner. You know, factor that into your plans. You know, give yourself time. You know, reach out to other musicians, see if they can help, see if they know anybody who might be able to act as a petitioner in the US for you. That can be a problem, finding a petitioner. Okay. The next big problem that we're seeing, and this is a more recent thing, it's always been a problem, but it's particularly more recently. Itineraries and contracts, specifically for O1Bs. If you're looking to apply for a 3-year O1B, you need to have a 3-year projected itinerary. I know that it's not common to have a 3-year itinerary, and 3-year itineraries are not confirmed, but you run the risk if you don't have a 3-year itinerary, a projected itinerary, and sample contracts throughout that period. You run the risk of USCIS coming back and saying this is speculative employment, issuing a request for evidence, and then potentially shortening the validity dates of that visa. So again, what we say is we recommend having a projected itinerary, clearly stating that this is projected, it's subject to change, and it will be changed. You're going to be adding events to it, and this is permitted by the regulations. Provide all your confirmed contracts for US-based performances activities, and provide some draft contracts that line up with your projected itinerary. You know, record deals as well. If you have sponsorship deals, you know, if you've sync deals with anybody like that, put all of that in. Whatever you have, put it in. Timing, another thing we see, people don't give themselves enough time. They come to us and, you know, they're looking to be here and they just don't have enough time. It's very stressful for everybody. You know, it doesn't give you enough time to account for if things go wrong. And, you know, generally when you're in situations where you don't want something to go wrong, something's probably going to go wrong. So timing, just make sure you give yourself enough timing for your petition. Questions? Okay, let me see Q&A. Okay, so I see here in the sorry, bear with me, in the chat I have. Okay, so visas, how much cost per artist and how long it takes to get the P3? I think I addressed how long it takes. The various different visas, they have different costs. If you're doing, P1B, if you're doing it for a band, that P1B will cover the entire band. There's attorney fees, there's filing fees, there's union consultation fees for those letters from the AFM and IATSA. Then you also have to pay a fee to get the visa stamp put in your passport. It's 190 per applicant. If you're going to be bringing crew with your P1B, then that's a separate fee. There is attorney fees for the P1S. There's filing fees for the P1S. There's consultation fee for that. And there's, visa processing fees for everybody to get their visas and their passports. Again, P3 is the same thing. That will cover, an individual or a group. If you're bringing any essential support with that, they're going to be separate. They're going to have their own attorney fees, filing fees as well. O1B, same thing. O1B will cover an individual artist. And then O2 would be all of the crew. If you have supporting musicians or crew, they'll have their separate case that has attorney fees, filing fees, consultation fees, and so forth. So if anybody, it's just too hard to list out all of those fees. If anybody wants to has specific inquiries, wants to know about fees, please reach out to us. Our if you type in McEnteelawgroup.com, you'll find us. And then please follow us on social media. We try to be as active as we can and, provide updates in relation to into various things that are going on and changes in immigration. These are all our handles here. Let me see. Sorry, I know I ran a little bit over time. Do we have any other questions? You're very welcome. I hope it was informative. Obviously just with the okay, great. Let me see here. Okay, great. Okay, so being offered a full-time with an American artist, what kind of doing social media? Okay, so depending with an American artist, any essential support, it's out of your question. You don't need that because the artist it's a US artist, so there'd be nothing to link you to that. I would advise maybe doing like a consultation to kind of go over some options. It would depend. We're doing social media, content creation, and comms. There could be potentially some options for you. Maybe you could look at doing an O1 for yourself, depending on, if you can meet that criteria. Maybe you could do an O1B in the arts. That might be a good role for you. And if you were to maybe look at an O1B role, it could allow you the flexibility to kind of work in your field of extraordinary ability, and you could maybe work with different employers. So that could be an option. In relation to fees, specific fees, if you can email us, we can respond by email and give you quotes for fees. If you email info@mcenteelaw.com, if you email us, we can send you on fees. Processing times, again, it depends, probably about 3 to 4 weeks from as soon as we got everything. But email us and we can follow up and give you some more information. Lawyer or petitioner, it doesn't need to be an agent. It can just be an organization that is offering the gig. Yeah. I mean, the agent can be, it doesn't have to be your employer. An agent can just need to show you're in the business of being an agent, and you provide authorizations in that respect to do it. Typically, it's better if it's someone working within that field. Doesn't have to be. It can be anybody, and depending on what way you set up the agent petitioner setup, really determines on what the working relationship is. Sometimes we have agent petitioners where, it's an agent for multiple employers, and they're filing it on behalf of multiple employers, and they also have like a deal with that person, and they're also one of the employers. Other times it's a booking agent who's just kind of organizing their US events, and they'll file it as an agent performing the function of employer. Other times, they don't have any relationship. It's just you're agreeing to file this on behalf of foreign company. You've no working relationship. You're just agreeing to file the case for them, and that's the extent of your relationship. So it really depends. Oh, yes. It doesn't have to be. It does. So, good question. Agent in immigration context, it's not like a music agent. It's not like agent in entertainment. It doesn't have to be an agent. It just means, agent for immigration purposes, that you're agreeing to file the petition, and then, you define what it is. It's not like agent in the entertainment context. They don't have to be an actual agent to do it. It can be, but no, it doesn't have to be. It can be anybody. It can be an individual. It can be, typically it's better if it's somebody who has sort of some nexus to the music industry. Doesn't have to be though. It could be, it could be a cultural center. It could be a venue. It could be a record label. It could be, a sponsor. It could be anything like that. Yeah. If you're sponsoring nonprofit P3, do you need to get letters from another nonprofit stating unique qualities, or do you need additional? It depends. I'd probably advise getting a few letters. Typically, you would provide like 3 or 4 letters, talking about the culturally unique. You don't have to, but typically that's what I would do. I would say, let's provide 3 or 4 letters from people who can absolutely talk about the culturally unique aspect of this performance. So that's my advice there. For flamenco, probably P3, I would say, depending on, you would want to kind of talk a little bit more. Maybe it could be an O1, depending on the beneficiary. If it's just one person, if you're bringing multiple people in, maybe a P3 might work. Okay. Okay. Do we have any more? I think I have gotten most of the questions there. Any more questions? Okay. Well, look, I'm going to let everybody go. If there's no other questions, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you found this informative. And if anybody needs follow-ups or wants to, inquiries as to specific fees for matters, please reach out to us. You can get us info@mcenteelaw.com. Please email us, and that will come into our team. We have a lot of experience. We do a lot of music, sports, performance-based visas, and green cards. I'll do another follow-up webinar. I'll talk about the long-term options, immigrant options for musicians and artists. And just wasn't enough time to talk about all of this here now. Okay. Thanks, everybody.